Started. Welcome everyone to our monthly meeting. This meeting will be recorded and available at MoPag.net in a few days. I'd like to welcome Timothy Shepard, candidate for U.S. Senate, as our guest speaker today. Let's first do the Treasury report and then announcements. Christina Anderson, our treasurer. What's our money situation look like?
Okay, in the bank, we have $456.75. There is a deposit and transfer from Act Blue for $96. So that would put us over 500 once we receive that in the bank.
Okay.
I have to apologize on that. Yeah, I was meaning to go. I had stopped by, but it's been about a week looking for a check from them. And
yeah, it was cut on 4/14.
okay.
So
it wasn't in the bank, say about a week ago. So
yeah,
remember to go back.
it's on its way.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, membership dues, we're lacking in that area. So I don't know about the people on today, but if you haven't paid up, please go to mopag.net and donate there or sign up there. Okay. Any announcements today? I have an announcement that there is and I posted it in the chat. There is what they're calling a votercade or motorcade on the 8th of May. The actual car motorcade starts at 2. And the purpose is a day of action, John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Day of Action. And I plan on going to show support for HR 1, the John Lewis Voting Rights, HR 4, DC statehood, and get rid of the filibuster. So the exact timing of events is in the chat. And there's a number of speakers there, including the mayor of St. Louis and others.
Awesome.
Okay, I'm now going to turn the meeting over to our special guest, Mr. Shepard. Will tell you how he would like to take your questions. And of course, you can post them in chat if you prefer to do it that way. So Timothy, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to come and meet you today. It's really exciting to see how many groups there are all over Missouri who are really engaging in our civic discourse and strengthening our democracy. It's really important right now. So 2022 is going to be really about answering that question for voters all over the country. Are we going to slide into democracy, autocracy, or are we going to stand by our American tradition and choose democracy? And so thank you for having me with you. I have a little bit of my stump speech ready for you, and then I wanted to get into some Q&A if that's all right with everybody. Please feel free to check out. I put the website links and social media in the Zoom chat for you. So please feel free to check those out and spread the word. I appreciate it. So who here hates dealing with the Department of Motor Vehicles? I agree, Carissa, I do as well. I just recently had to go through the process of getting my car titled and registered, and it took 3 trips to the county official, and then I had to go to the DMV 3 times. But when I was finally victorious, I got my new plates, and they reminded me that we Missourians are celebrating our bicentennial this year. And the bicentennial reminded me of the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And so the Missouri Compromise was federal legislation that stopped Northern abolitionist attempts from forever prohibiting the expansion of slavery in the United States when they admitted Missouri into the Union as a slave state. And so it was really important to me. I know that's an uncomfortable bit of our history, but I wanted to make sure that I lodged the term Missouri Compromise into your thoughts. And so thank you for having me. I'm Tim Shepard, and I'm very proud to be a Missourian. Excuse me. And I'm framing our conversation today with the Missouri Compromise because in the Tim Shepard for US Senate campaign, we are declaring to the world that we are a Missouri uncompromised. So I'm sure that Ron, Al, and others, we have family members who don't have access to proper health care. And I suspect that a lot of us have friends and family, if not ourselves, have people who don't have consistent access to reliable high-speed internet. And since this is a Democratic group, I'm pretty sure that we're all in agreement that the attack on the Capitol on January 6th it was really, really unacceptable, and that the slide toward autocracy that we're seeing in Jefferson City, as well as in the United States, is something that at least we all consider to be a very real threat to our democracy and to our way of life. And so that's why I'm running to represent Missouri in the United States Senate and to declare that we're not going to compromise on healthcare in federal legislation anymore. I'm running to be a senator from Missouri who will no longer compromise on our children's education and making sure that the United States has the most educated workforce and citizenry in the world to ensure that we can compete. I'm running to be a senator from Missouri who will not compromise on common sense safety reforms for our guns. I'm a proud gun owner, but I think that we need to get some common sense safety to prevent the catastrophe after catastrophe and tragedy after tragedy that's happening in this country. I'm running to be a senator from Missouri who will not compromise on LGBTQ families like my own right to exist in our society, and to declare that Missouri is a place that is open for every single citizen and every single family. And I'm running to be a senator from Missouri who will not compromise on the value of Black lives. So in my campaign platform, we are running and we aim to restore democracy, to restore capitalism, and to invest in our future. And together with all of your help, we will volunteer. I would love your donations at the link in the chat box so that we can make sure that we cover every single square inch of this state and get people excited to participate in democracy again. And with your help, we're going to have a voter drive, and we're going to register 100,000 to 200,000 new voters and make sure that we get those 140 votes per precinct that we need on average in order to make sure that we flip Missouri blue in 2022. And I know that we can do it together. So I'm really happy to be here today with you guys. Our kids, our grandkids, our nieces and nephews deserve to inherit a world that is prosperous, where America is leading in innovation. And that's why I don't want to be a senator who compromises on green infrastructure. And we need to invest in new green infrastructure to ensure that the jobs of the future and the wealth of the future are created right here in the United States, and especially here in Missouri. And we can't afford to compromise on our children's future security on this planet. If we don't invest in green infrastructure, then the planet's going to make some decisions for us, and it's going to be not great for our kids. But it's an awesome opportunity for us to lead the world in innovation, and it's an awesome opportunity for us to create tremendous new wealth while we prevent that disaster from happening. And so I'm Tim Shepard. I'm an everyday citizen, just like you guys. And I'm really delighted to be running to represent you in the United States Senate. I believe that folks like us, we are America, and that we believe in a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multiracial, multi-abled, multi-gendered, multi-oriented society, and that Together, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that each of us.
Exactly right. Why would they? They're just big policy for all of you. I mean, why know any of this stuff? Yeah.
And so when you
Be done.
Sorry about that.
Hello. And so each of us, Dawn and Ron and Carissa and Martin, is created equal, and that we all deserve to be represented as real citizens, not just the elite, in the United States Senate. And together with all of you, I'm fighting for our home to have a senator who's ready to declare to the world that we are a Missouri uncompromised. And that's my stump speech. And I would love all of your help in making sure that we're able to do that. And now, if you'd like, you can go to the website and donate on ActBlue. And now I'm ready to take some questions. Thank you, Christina, for that question about how to campaign in the rural areas of Missouri. It's with all of your help that I've been canvassing. I've been going to every single Democratic Central Committee in the state. Last week, I was in Mexico, Missouri for a candidate forum, and then I went up to Hannibal, Missouri for their Democratic Club meeting. Then I was able to be in Jefferson City for one of the lobbying days. And then my friends at the AFG local number 2338 down in Poplar Bluff, representing the Veteran Affairs Administration, invited me for a protest, and I was very proud to join them. And that is essentially how we're going to do it, is by starting right now, going all over the state for every single event possible to get the opportunity to chat with people. I'm reaching out to Baptist ministers and Catholic priests. I'm reaching out to progressive organizations, and I'm reaching out to Democrats and Republicans alike to have the opportunity to come and meet people so that they have a chance to actually know me as a candidate and build a relationship starting now. And it's your help that enables us to be able to do that. And so we appreciate being able to do that. Does that answer your question, Christina?
Christina, you should unmute.
Yeah, well, my next concern is we are a Trump country. How are you going to convert those Trump people? I mean, what you say sounds good for Kansas City, Columbia, Missouri, and St. Louis, but we get our butt kicked everywhere else in Missouri. How do you plan to get over that hurdle?
So like I was saying, we need 140 votes per precinct on average in order to get over that sort of crossing line. And we think that it's an additive strategy that's going to help us do that, and not a divide and conquer strategy. And so there's a lot of Trump voters out there, some people in my own family, who feel like they aren't talked to enough by Democrats because we're really, really good as Democrats at saying women, we need to help women, and African Americans, we need to help African Americans, and LGBTQ people, we need to help you. And we need to do the same thing for working class folks all over the state, and farmers, and protecting the rural way of life. And that's why we, in my campaign platform, we want to invest in new broadband infrastructure that's canvassing the whole state to make sure that people are able to access the jobs of the now. And we want to invest in green infrastructure and new forms of electricity generation that's actually going to generate wealth in northern Missouri with wind harvesting. There's really amazing opportunities by investing in battery storage capacity and in a lot of agriculture initiatives that are happening to reduce water. And that's going to be a huge, huge area for us to be able to win jobs. And then we need to have federal legislation that protects local farmers. And we need to rework and revamp the Department of Agriculture so that small farmers, like family farms with 200 acres, are able to compete and have access to the financing that they need in order to compete against these big, giant international monopolies, and we need to use the antitrust laws that are at our disposal in order to make sure that Smithfields of the world and Chinese conglomerates and Brazilian conglomerates aren't forcing our mom and pop shops out of business. And we need to revisit that on a retail level as well. There's been a lot of dollar generalization, Walmartizing, etc. And that has decimated Main Street all over the country, and especially here in our rural towns. And so we need to make sure that small businesses are able to have access to the kinds of financing they need in order to be able to compete against the massive scale of Walmart, Amazon, Dollar General. And then the other thing with green infrastructure, Missouri is blessed as one of the most beautiful states in the union. We've got the Ozark Scenic Riverways, we've got the Mark Twain National Forest, and adventure tourism is more than $1 trillion industry every single year in the United States. And there's immense opportunity for us to be able to help Missouri families tap into that market and have a sustainable living for a small farm with agritourism and with adventure tourism.
Can I ask a question? If Christine is
Absolutely.
done? Okay. One of the things that I've noticed is that every day just about I get emails informing me about what's going on in the campaigns and asking me to donate to your two opponents, Scott Sifton and Lucas Kuntz. And I'd like to know why you're not using that strategy, because they are a lot more visible than you are as a candidate.
Well, we have a goal of raising $100,000 this quarter to prove our viability. The fact of the matter is they started with a lot more seed money than I did, and we're proving the grassroots model out. That talking to groups like this is really the key toward getting that momentum built, and that gets into the question that Ron asked about how I differentiate myself from the other candidates. On the Scott Sifton front, he was a state senator from St. Louis area. He voted yes on a bill to incarcerate 14-year-olds, and that's alienated him from a huge percentage of votes that we absolutely must get in order to flip this seat. And so he has an enormous obstacle to overcome, regardless of the fact that he has a lot of the establishment and insiders and money behind him right now. He's got to prove that he can actually get over that vote hurdle, and I haven't seen him make any attempts to go to African-American churches or to restore the relationships that he's got to do there. I do that on a regular basis. And for Lucas Kuntz, the thing that differentiates me from him is that I walk the walk, and I'm not just sort of wearing the skin of bashing corporations in our country. I think we actually have to partner with corporations, the good ones, in order to make sure that America maintains its competitive edge. And the other thing that's a little iffy about him, he resides in Virginia. He's employed right now by a 501c3 that shares a board of directors with a 501c4 while he's campaigning against the influence of dark money in our country. I find that unacceptable and quite frankly dangerous for democracy itself and for the structure of democracy. And that's why we're proving in our campaign a grassroots model actually can work from the bottom up. And we're not just saying it, we're working to build it.
I have another question, if I may, and that is, you mentioned education as being a concern, and you didn't say anything very specific about what you mean there.
Yep.
What kind of schools do you think we should have? Do you support the destabilization of public education through privatization of public education? Do you, what's your position? If you're going to be a United States Senator, what kind of legislation to strengthen our public schools are you going to support?
Thank you, Susan. That's a fantastic question. I'm a huge advocate on a lot of fronts of early childhood education and making sure that people have access to that. My sister is a single mother of 4 children, and it would be a tremendous asset to their family if we had a lot more robust early childhood education programs. And that's going to go a long way because reading levels really start at a very, very young age. And we have to make sure that kids who don't have access to the same amount of resources as other kids are able to actually get that reading level in the pre-K and be prepared by the 2nd grade to actually be at grade level, because that's when we lose the kids. In terms of being pro school choice, I think is the word that a lot of Republicans like to campaign on. I think that I could potentially come around to compromising with them if they were able to support their pro school choice option, not ever taking funding away from our public schools. I think that's a catastrophe. It's absolutely something that we can't afford to do, and our public education is the backbone of this country's education. I think we need to increase funding for the Department of Education to make sure that urban and rural schools alike get the funding that they need, regardless of the property values in their zip code. Because what we see in Kansas City and St. Louis and all over Missouri, you've got really wealthy zip codes who vote up their taxes in order to make sure that their kids get the best education possible. And then you've got like the 8th congressional district here in Missouri, where the median household income is $22,000 and less. And like, they're just in extreme poverty. And so they're not able to even keep the lights on. They're facing decisions in their school districts to close 1 day a week because of the electric bill. There are school gymnasiums that have holes in the roofs in this state, and that's unacceptable. We need to use the Department of Education to help equalize funding for our public education at the K through 12 level, and make sure that teachers have a baseline income. We don't have a shortage of teachers coming up in our country. We have a shortage of pay to keep people in a really tough profession. And we're forcing teachers into poverty, and we need to be doing a better job on the part of our teachers. Then we need a lot more investment in vocational training and partnering that with our high schools. Again, there's a huge amount of infrastructure in this country that has to be built. There's a lot of carpenters and electricians and plumbers, and there's going to be a shortage of them because we haven't been directing people into that as a valid venue for them to be able to pursue their careers. We have to get that up to speed. We need to make community college free for everyone, and we need to pick programs in the public land-grant universities where we're talking about research for green infrastructure, for nurses, for doctors, for lawyers, where we're making sure that people are able to attend university all the way through a PhD level at a land-grant university. If they're getting the right grades, they should not be graduating with student loan debt and starting their professional lives behind. That's bad. That's a drag on our economy, and it's holding us back, and it's hurting our competitive edge in the world, because countries like China are catching up and they're investing, and if we don't, it's just a race to the bottom. So we really have to systematically, all the way through the whole entire system, make sure that we're prioritizing education. Yes, Steve.
Al Gerber asked in the chat, will you be visiting all the congressional district meetings for redistricting, especially ours, Missouri 2nd Congressional District, on May 11th?
That's a really good idea. I will add that to my calendar. And if you could email me at timothy@tshepard.com, I will get all of that information to my campaign manager, and I will be at as many of those as possible, because that's a really, really good idea. I saw that they're planning to try and draw Emmanuel Cleaver's seat out, and that's unacceptable. And when I get to the United States Senate, I'm going to support legislation that allows for fair redistricting that is not in the hands of politicians, but in the hands of drawing the borders based on population density the way that it should be, because politicians should never be choosing their voters. And I also stand for things like the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And then I want to go a step further than the For the People Act and limit campaign contributions to 501c4s and super PACs, because I don't think 100 families should have such outsized representation to the 330 million Americans.
I have another question, Timothy. This is kind of a general question, but seeing as how you're from Missouri. So what happened over the last couple of decades that the Democrats lost Missouri or Republicans won Missouri? How do you view that? What the hell happened?
A lot happened. I grew up, it's really interesting because I grew up in Kearney and Excelsior Springs, and my mom went to college down in Springfield. And I remember riding around in the car with my parents, and they would be talking about the degradation of our social contract and how companies don't treat workers the right way anymore, and how people are losing their retirements, and it's all driven by greed. And it really struck me as odd that, like, despite that sentiment, my family grew up very staunchly Republican and consistently voting for the people who were driving those factors and driving the levers that led that degradation in our social contract to happen. And I think the advent of Fox News has been completely detrimental. The information ecosystem in this country is it is not okay. It's not healthy. And when you have news branding all over opinion column all day long, what you end up with the most watched news network in the country is a lot of people who are being told that what they're consuming is news, but in fact, it's just political opinion and commentary. And so that's gone with some buzzing noise happening, but that's been the sort of building block that's led to this divide and this gulf in information ecosystems that people are having access to. And then with the advent of social media, it's been really a dangerous sort of echo chamber where people will share opinions and they were going to share their thoughts on something without fact checking it, without saying whether or not it's an opinion or news, and that has like amplified what used to happen just at the kitchen table. Can everybody mute their
Yeah, let's all mute
their
if we're not
their
talking.
microphones? Okay.
Arnie? Steve, can we mute?
There we go. Okay, so the information ecosystem, we have to work with social media companies on getting them to create the processes that are going to help filter what's news versus what's opinion, and they have to take responsibility for creating that structure, or we have to figure out some other way of being able to work with them. And then on Fox News and CNN and MSNBC, their opinion columns are fine, but we need to take that news branding away. Opinion column.
Do you support some form of fairness doctrine return?
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of the fairness doctrine. And, you know, the news needs to just be the news. It should be, quite frankly, a little bit boring and not based on how many clicks you're able to get and the outrage that you're able to provoke in order to get people to watch you. That's why Donald Trump was able to become president, because it was all driven by, frankly, profit rather than integrity.
Well, right now, Josh Hawley is positioning himself as Mr. Anti-Monopoly. Is he really going to own that space? Are the Democrats not going to grab that space?
I would work with him on those issues, but I'd also vote to censure him for his part in January 6th. I think Democrats have an interesting opportunity right now, not just to be anti-monopoly, but to recognize some of the corporations in this country actually have recognized this wealth disparity gap that's happened and the level of partisan divide that it's created. And so the Business Roundtable, which represents the 100 largest companies in the United States, actually, they just changed the definition of the purpose of a corporation. And it's important for us as Democrats to recognize that and say, hey, cool, Business Roundtable, that's awesome that you want to do that. Now let's put some teeth into it and codify that into law so that you don't just have this fancy marketing material that you're able to push out there about wanting to have a better representation for workers and for community stakeholders like mayors, but you're actually held accountable to that new standard. And that's actually one of the dishes that I bring to the table, so to speak, in terms of policy proposals, is to introduce legislation for corporations in this country to expand their corporate boards and to have equal representation between investors, that's capital, and workers, that's labor, and community representatives like mayors. And whenever that happens, you'll find in corporate governance that when compensation issues come up, when labor has a democratically elected board representation that has an equal voice to investors, all of a sudden you'll see a much more fair distribution of the corporate income between the CEO and the workers. And that's something that I'm a huge proponent of. And I think we have a really unique opportunity to work with companies because they've actually introduced some of that language. They realize the risk, and now we need to have the government come alongside and put some teeth into that and hold them accountable to it. Yes. Susan.
I'm finding everything that you're saying very interesting. And I would like to ask you, what is your educational and professional background?
Absolutely. Well, I graduated from Kearney High School here in the Kansas City area. And then I decided I wanted to be an architect. So I went off to Boston, Back Bay, and I studied at Boston Architectural College for 2 years on an architecture degree. Then I decided it would be a good idea to change my major, and I registered in the Art Institute of Pittsburgh to understand web design and interactive media. Once I achieved my diploma with the web design program, I had $60,000 in student loans, and that was more than I was comfortable having. And so I decided it was time for me to embark on my professional career. I became a missionary in North Africa. I lived in Morocco, helping women access fair trade markets. When I was on a fundraising trip back home in Kansas City, I came out as LGBTQ. I identified myself publicly as such. And unfortunately, that institution fired me. And so I pivoted into entrepreneurship. I was at a community outreach program with the Kauffman Foundation, actually at a class taught by Miss Diana Kander, Jason Kander's wife. And that really opened up a lot of doors for me. I got an unbelievable opportunity and an invitation to Chicago to work for the founders of Groupon for their venture capital arm. And I worked with nonprofits there while I was an advocate and an activist for LGBTQ rights. I was working with 2 of their nonprofits to help rebuild their websites and user experience. Then I launched my own small business after that experience was over, designing websites and marketing materials for companies. That was going really well, but I only had one major client. I wasn't diversified, and they dissolved their partnership, and that left me once again unemployed. And so I used that opportunity to, with zero money, my ID had expired, my cell phone expired, and I got myself to New York City. I couch surfed. I had literally $100. I ate dollar meals in Chinatown, and I used the public library in New York City as my launch pad to go to interview after interview after interview in firms all over the city. About 8 months of that went by, and I was done. I didn't have anything, and I was about to throw in the towel and come home again to my parents' couch. And that's when I got hired by a finance firm in the asset management industry in their technology business. And they made me a junior executive, and they taught me the legislative process. And when they moved their headquarters from New York to Tennessee, I went with them. And that's when I got onto this track of public service, because the Tennessee legislature thought it would be a grand idea to have 6 very I think 7 actually, discrimination bills toward LGBTQ people. And I convinced my employer to become the first major company in the state's history to write a letter to the state legislature on behalf of a social issue. Every other major company in the state joined us, and not a single one of those bills made it out of committee that year. I'm very, very proud of that. Shortly after that, I learned about the impact of the prison industrial complex, Jim Crow 2.0. I learned how many nonviolent criminals are literally in our prison system and subjected to very inhumane conditions. And I became very passionate about that. And so I led the divestment effort from my employer, very large asset manager, from the for-profit prison industry. They no longer trade 1 year later any for-profit prisons in their $650 billion portfolio. And that was the experience when I discovered some conflicts of interest between the activism work that I was doing and being an executive at the firm. And so I decided public service would be a much better venue for me. And my husband and I moved home to Missouri and started working on campaigns here and launched this campaign for the United States Senate.
How long have you been living in the state? And is there, I believe there's a limit. I'm not sure, actually. I know for some, running for some offices, you have to be a resident for a certain period of time. I doubt that's true for the US Senate, now that I think about it.
It's not. I lived in the state through 2006, and then again from 2009 to 2014, and then I moved back last summer from my stint in Tennessee.
Okay, so well, we'll see how that plays.
Well, Mr. Coates still lives in Virginia, so that'll be an interesting.
Josh Hawley does also, I know.
Yeah, but like I said, the reason that I wanted to run at home, I have skin in the game here. My grandpa's from Gallatin, Missouri. I grew up in Kearney. My great-grandparents are from St. Joe, and my dad's parents are buried down in Theodosia. And I have very, very fond memories growing up in the Boy Scouts and in the Ozark Plateau, the woods there, here in this state. And Missouri has been on this slide toward autocracy, and I feel like in order to run for office, you need to really have a deep connection to the people of the state that you're trying to represent. And that's why I wanted to come home. And I'm very, very proud to be here with my family and to be declaring to the world that families like ours do exist here in Missouri, and we're proud to exist here in Missouri. And I'm really, really excited about what that means moving forward.
We have a question in the chat from Ron Zager. I live in Missouri, and I don't remember Sifton voting to incarcerate 14-year-old children. Would you expound on that, please?
Yeah. let me pull up, I don't have the article handy, but I will find it and I will share that with you in the chat. So give me just a minute on that, or I can send you an email afterwards.
Can you
Remember,
talk
Ron,
about it, please, while we're waiting?
Yeah, sure. So there was a bill in the legislature. I think it was actually an omnibus bill, so I can understand how he would vote for it, to be quite frank with you. But it's really upset a lot of people in St. Louis and Kansas City. I've talked with Reverend Gray and some other leaders in the African American community who are very unhappy with him about that, and so that's my extent of working with it and really understanding it. And I haven't seen him doing the work really to. I think it's a bridgeable thing, but I haven't seen him doing the work to bridge it. So that's a factor. Does
Thank
that
you.
answer your question?
yeah, Ron, I remember when that happened. And yeah, there were a lot of people who were unhappy about that. I remember Rachel Prouty and Kevin Linden and others came back very angry. Our Democrats did.
Can I ask you if you've developed a relationship with Congresswoman Cori Bush yet?
Not directly. I am working on that, and I have people that are reaching out to her. Some of the consultants that I work with have a good relationship with her, and we're working on developing that further. I look forward to working with her on the trail to advocate for Missouri, and I'm very, very proud of everything that she's been able to accomplish in her time so far.
And have you met or spoken with the new mayor of St. Louis, Tashora Jones, yet?
I've met her on Twitter, and we've got a very friendly interaction going back and forth between ourselves. I haven't met her in person yet, and I look forward to doing that soon on a trip to St. Louis.
Yeah.
We have another question in the chat from Don Logue, which we've touched on before, but maybe you want to say a little bit more about it. Don asks, how are we going to get Republicans and independents that voted for Trump to cross back to our side?
I think we've just got to appeal to their patriotism. There was a really interesting book by a guy named, now I'm forgetting his name, Jonathan Haidt, about morality at a societal level. And he uses this concept that people have different moral palettes. And a lot of Republicans in this country have a very different moral palette than a lot of Democrats do. And so a Democrat will be talking about our values, about making sure everyone has access to health care and everyone has access to education. And that's what pulls at our heartstrings, and it's what motivates us to move and to vote. But a lot of Republicans, they're a little bit different, and they value individual liberty and they value independence. And so we have to learn how to sort of bridge the language gap. It's The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. Highly recommend this book for everyone. If you have friends and neighbors who you find that you have a difficult time talking to about politics, what a lot of that is driven by is just the fact that we approach morality differently, and we have different receptors, different ways of interacting with the world around us. And so in the campaign platform, it's really like this appeal to the uniting element of we are America and a Missouri uncompromised, and that patriotism, like we've got to beat China, and learning how to empower them, and then being very intentional. Like I said earlier in the discussion, a lot of Democrats are really good at explicitly talking to women or LGBTQ people or African American people, and they're not really good at talking to poor working class white people. And we have to fix that and make sure that we're addressing their needs and our local farmers' needs, and that they feel heard.
Along those lines, I want to ask for your personal opinion on something.
Mhm.
I've noticed that the Democrats in the state and in regions in the state, I guess, are coalescing behind this message, Dems care. And I'm wondering if that's a good message or not.
I think it's a good message for Democrats. I don't know if it's going to help us appeal to Republicans and independents who have gone for Trump. And the reason why is because it's suggesting that they don't. And anytime we open a conversation with somebody by implicitly telling them that they don't care, that is an automatic. They're going to be on defense against us, and so we have to figure out how to be as inclusive as possible. Part of my campaign's plans for being able to do that is when we get over the threshold, I think when we hit our fundraising numbers for this quarter, we'd like to go on actually Fox News, not the opinion columns, but the news portion, and we have to go where the people are. And the people of this state, they watch Fox, whether we like it or not. And so we have to get on there and we have to talk to them, and we have to talk about the wind in the sails that the Biden administration is giving us, and the fact that his policies are going to lead to a 5 to 7% economic growth rate for us this year, and that the new policy that he just signed by closing a deal with Mexico and Guatemala is going to address the border issue that they're all very, very concerned about, and that it's actually democratic ideas and policies that are very specifically addressing their concerns. And give them a counter narrative, because they're only hearing people bash us every day. That's all their whole information ecosystem. And we have to get into their information ecosystem and say, no, and here's the issue that you care about, and here's how our policies actually address that better than the other side. Ron, you were asking, how do we handicap the Republican race for US Senate? I fully don't know the answer to that question. I will be honest about that. But what I do believe in my soul is that love and hope, and the values of love and hope, and the message of the great commandment in the gospel of love your neighbor, that those are universal truths, and that they're far, far stronger than fear and hate. And what I'm seeing on the Republican side of the aisle for every single one of them that's running is this campaign platform of fear and hate and division. And what we know since World War II through the present is that when we as Americans lean into practicing our values, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all of us is created equal, and individual liberty and democracy, that's our strength. And the diversity of this country is what feeds that. And the Republicans are leaning into a message of fear and hate. And I think it worked for Trump. It's a very powerful emotion. But I think that leaning into a deeper sense of patriotism is the way that we're going to be able to appeal to people and help unify this country, so that we are really ready to address the threats of the 21st century, so that we're ready to hold a rising China accountable, because we have a very, very different way of operating in the world than they do in China. We believe in democracy. And when we point to Japan and we point to Germany, and we point to the places in the world where democracy has created, frankly, a golden age in human civilization, we have evidence that when we lean into those values, it really works. And we have also evidence that when we lean into autocracy and when we lean into dictatorship, chaos follows, including when the United States has been involved in implementing those devices.
I have another question, Timothy.
Mhm.
It's not directly related to your campaign, but I'm always looking, and we're always looking for ideas to move St. Louis forward. What was the experience with Chicago Ideas? That was the TED-like initiative, right? And I'm wondering if that's something that's worthwhile, or how did that turn out?
Well, absolutely. It was, so Chicago Ideas is a phenomenal festival. Every single year, they have more than 30,000 people show up at events all over the city. My old boss gets a lot of really amazing speakers to be able to show up, and you know, folks like Hillary Clinton and major academics and people who everyone wants to go and watch give a talk. It's amazing. And that any kind of a festival like that is a huge economic driver for the city, because you're bringing in a lot of people, and they're getting to experience the city and interact with it in an incredible way. I think that there's other examples. If you look down in Austin, Texas, at the South by Southwest Festival, and some of the music festivals that they have, that's been the real growth engine for Austin. It's put them on the map. And St. Louis is one of the most beautiful cities in the country architecturally. You have amazing, amazing assets. And when we're able to get people to come and visit and feel this energy, I think that they're going to want to stay. And I think it's a great idea to work with community partners. And I'm really excited for the day personally when St. Louis, you know, they've lost 600,000 people within the city limits of St. Louis from the peak of its population. And I can't wait until we get those people back. And St. Louis is, it's like a Boston or a Washington, D.C. It's really one of the greatest cities in the country. And I'm excited to celebrate that with everybody.
Are there other questions I might have missed in the chat, or anything else? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming today. We appreciate it very much. And Susan, anything you want to say?
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for having me. As I said, we're building a legitimate grassroots organization from the ground up, and I need your help to prove that it's possible. So please visit the Act Blue link and help us reach our $100,000 goal for the quarter. That's what we need to do to prove to the movers and shakers that we can do this thing. And that's when they're going to start kicking in some of the infrastructure to help us compete. And so I need your help to do that. And everybody that can kick in $25, $50, $100, it's a huge, huge step forward for us in showing that grassroots really is the strength. And then when I finally get in the US Senate, we'll get those campaign contribution limits on 501c4s and super PACs, and have public financing so that we can always have the best candidate for the job and not just the most well-connected candidate for the job.
Okay, well, thank you again. We're going to, I think Susan Turk is going to give us a summary of legislative matters. You're certainly welcome to stick around for that if you like,
Sure.
but whatever you want to do on that score. Susan, you want to take over here?
Yeah, let me close the chat window so I can open up my report screen. The Missouri legislature seems to be on steroids this year in terms of the really wicked stuff that they're up to, considering how well the Republicans did in 2020 here. I'm kind of surprised at some of what they're doing, but I'm sure that it is being dictated a lot by the American Legislative Exchange Council, and that they are in lockstep with every other Republican-led legislature in the country. So just to give you, if I don't get through all of this, because I don't want to bore you guys too much with some of it, I'm going to email you what I'm concerned about. But a lot of it starts off with ballot initiatives and voter suppression, as you all know, and I'm sure most of you have heard about a lot of this in the through the media. They are trying to pass bills that would make it much more difficult for ballot initiatives to get approved. One is HB 333 and the other is a House HJR Resolution 20, which would require a 2/3 majority instead of a simple majority for ballot initiatives to pass, shorten the time that you could collect signatures, and increase the number of signatures that have to be collected in all congressional districts, not just 6 of the 8, in order to get on the ballot in the first place. And they would also prevent the courts from rewriting any language that was inaccurate about what the resolution's really about. The legislature keeps trying to undermine every ballot initiative that has passed in the state, whether it has to do with puppy mills or the minimum wage or right to work or Medicaid expansion. Every single time we pass one of these things, they then go to work to prevent it from being enacted. And we know with Medicaid expansion, they're refusing to fund it. So now they're trying to prevent the initiatives themselves from being passed. There are also a couple of bills that change I'm sorry I'm sounding so inarticulate. I'm still recovering from an illness. There are bills that require voter ID. There are bills that make it harder to get an absentee ballot. One of them is HB 1362. The ID bills are HB 334, HB 738, HB 1065, and SB 282. These things are actually, they're being combined and they are moving. And they're going to make it harder for the elderly or anybody who doesn't have a car or whatever to vote. So anyway, even though we have voter ID was thrown out by the courts, they're trying to get it passed again in a different form. With education, they're trying to get charter schools throughout the entire state. Some of the bills are statewide. Others are just in charter counties, and St. Louis County and St. Charles County are charter counties, as well as Jackson County on the western side of the state. So if SB 55 passes, which is one of 2 omnibus education bills, you may end up with charter schools in your district in the county. They are also, there's a charter school funding bill that takes funding that is due to public school districts and redistributes it to charter schools. In the city of St. Louis, it would take $17 million from our public schools and give it to the charter schools in the city. And it's to cover expenses that the charter schools do not have to spend on, like transportation or special education and other administrative costs. So the public school districts are required to spend money on things, and the charters are not, and the legislature is still vying to send the money to the charters. The St. Louis Public School District actually was sued by the charter schools 5 years ago. And the reason, and it's still tied up in the courts to try and get this money to them. And so the charters went to the legislature to try and do an end run around the lawsuit, which is not going the way they want it to go. So let's see. There's also a bill, HB 543, which would basically destroy school district boundaries by allowing people to enroll their child anywhere. That's something you want to be concerned about, because the money that the state distributes per capita for students would go with the child to the other school district. And it's a way of undermining public school districts. Now, there may be limits set in, let me see, there were some school districts would have the option to specify the number of transfer students they're willing to receive. And they may also adopt a diversity plan that would limit student transfers out of districts that would work against the diversity plan. So in other words, you wouldn't have too much integration if you didn't want it as a result of this. It's a funny bill, and it's, you know, do we want school districts or don't we? That bill has passed the House and it's gone to the Senate. So it has a possibility of being passed this year. There's also voucher legislation that is pretty damaging. There's one bill, HB 349, that is on the calendar in the Senate. It can be brought to the floor at any time. No, actually, it passed the Senate. It's gone to the House. Let me see. There's a school board. Well, they want to change the elections for school boards from April to November. If that's HB 920. If that happens, nobody's going to pay attention to school board elections anymore, because it's going to be during federal and state elections. And I just lost my report. Have you guys heard enough? Because I can just email you the rest of this. Seriously.
For you, there's a question for you
Sure.
about, can you give an example of a requirement on the public schools that the charter schools don't have to meet?
Charter schools are not required to provide transportation. They are not required to provide special education, and they do not provide this as intensive special education services as public school districts do. They are not required to provide gifted, well, no one's required to provide gifted education, but very few of them do. In terms of when charter schools close, the public schools are required to take on all of the student records of the closed charter schools, regardless of where those kids end up in the future. There are administrative costs that the public schools have to undertake in order to keep some consistency for those students going forward. There's a whole list of things. I can't remember all of them, but the superintendent of the St. Louis Public Schools has enumerated them. And if you want, I can email them to everybody. But there is a long list of things that the public schools are required to spend money on, and that the state and the federal government do not fully reimburse them for.
So Susan, were you going to cover any other legislation like Medicaid?
Yeah, in terms of Medicaid expansion, there is nothing in this. The budget that got passed by the Senate has nothing in it for that. And so if the governor signs it, doesn't send it back to them, it's going to end up in the courts.
According to what I read, and anybody else chip in on this, like Doug Beck, he seems to think that Medicaid will be funded.
Yes, there are a lot of people who are hopeful, but it hasn't happened yet. Right now, as of this week, there is no money in the state budget for Medicaid expansion. And there are Republican senators who are concerned because they don't want to end up with another court mandate. And they're pretty sure that if it goes to the courts, that the courts will require the state to pay for it. The thing that bothers me about this, and again, going back to education funding, there have been several lawsuits that have found the state to not be funding education equitably and have ordered the state to redistribute funds according to the foundation formula. And each time these lawsuits have done that, the legislature has still failed to provide fully funding or equitable funding through the foundation formula. And so my guess is that the same thing will happen with Medicaid, that if a court orders them to pay for it, that they will still find a way to drag their feet or not pay for all of it, or do it in some such a way as to undermine the intention of the voters. And we'll see. That's all I can say. But this legislature seems to be intent on not following what courts order them to do. And quite frankly, you cannot throw a legislature in jail. You cannot fine a legislature for not doing what a court orders it to do. What are the consequences? There are none. The only consequences is if the voters vote them out, and we haven't seen that happen. So I'm frustrated, and I'm not very optimistic about how that's going to turn out. A couple of other bills, gun safety, forget about it in this state. That's an oxymoron. There's an HB 86 that would allow concealed carry of firearms everywhere. It's passed the House Rules Committee. It's on the informal calendar as of the House as of April 20th. There's also a bill you've probably heard about, or two of them, HB 35 and HB 39, that would nullify any federal law at all that restricts gun use or gun ownership, and that would put law enforcement in the state at jeopardy of being fined if they tried to enforce federal gun restrictive laws. So that's a doozy. There's a House Bill 944 that allows the carrying of weapons on public transportation and in churches. There's another bill 359 that does the same thing, and HB 52 that does the same thing. There's numerous stuff, and there's also a bill that would prevent any political subdivision from restricting the carrying of firearms on college campuses or anywhere else. It's just more joy for the Second Amendmenters. Yes, Don.
So I mean, we have a Republican leadership is, for the most part, hell-bent on dismantling our social infrastructure in Missouri based upon ideology. And I mean, you just go down the list, and that's driving all of this. It's barbaric, it's stupid, it's driving the state into the ditch economically. Things got better. We're only the third worst state in the nation when it comes to the murder rate. So, just for a point of discussion, we're going to have to change our tactics here, I think, because, and I love, Tim's presentation, but we got to quit being so Pollyanna to think that we can appeal to morality. Okay. We're not going to win that battle. And so we got to be more aggressive and more strategic. And one of the places we need to go is we need to get the business community on our side, okay? And begin to get them to cut the legs off, cut the money off to these guys. And I don't have a full inventory of all those relationships, but one in particular stands out to me. And I'm sure I've mentioned it before, and that is Dave Stewart giving $750,000 to Jim Lemke and the Conservative Caucus. We know that money goes to campaigns, all the lies that went against all of our candidates in the last cycle, all that direct mail that preyed upon the fears of the electorate. A lot of that was funded by Dave Stewart, Worldwide Technologies. He should be a pariah in this community. And any other big corporate interests in both Kansas City and St. Louis need to get to work and call these people out.
And let me just tell you, I mean, every bill that I see, it's not a matter of not raising taxes, but they keep looking for creative ways to cut. There is a bill from Nick Schroer, HB 496, I believe it is, that would give you a refundable income tax credit for every expense having to do with sending all of your children to private schools. Tuition, books, fees, whatever you spend on sending your child to a private school. It would cost the state $1.2 billion if that were enacted. There's a gasoline tax refund bill. If they raise gasoline taxes, you could apply to the state to get all of your tax money that you spent. You'd save your receipts and then you'd get it all refunded. What the point is of raising the taxes, it would just, for a short time, it would be like giving the state a loan, but long term, they wouldn't hold on to it. Let me see. There's a couple of bills to lower the property tax rate. One to eliminate state income taxes altogether, but that one doesn't look like it's going anywhere. Property tax bill HB 248 would reduce property tax rate by 20%. That one was placed on the informal calendar, got its third reading on April 12th. Don't know whether or not there's time for it to go anywhere. There's a Wayfair bill that, let me see, it would tax internet, I guess internet purchases.
Sales tax.
But, pardon me?
Sales tax, so it's.
Yeah, but the thing is, you could then ask for it a refund. So what's the point? There's a property tax assessment bill, SB 131, that places a 5% cap on the percentage of growth of real estate residential property. It would mean that much real estate would never be assessed at their true market value. And so, again, less revenue for the state, less capacity for the state to be able to pay for services, and on and on and on. Oh, Andrew Koenig, who we all love, has filed a bill, SB 196, that would allow Ameren a tax break by allowing its property taxes to be assessed at personal property rather than as real estate. And that would cut their tax bill in half, saving them millions, but again, cutting state revenue. So any way that they can cut revenue, that's a major theme.
Well, if you go to the Missouri Republican website, they state right up front that government is best, which governs least. So you can never have too little government on that prescription, right? I mean, it leads you to zero government. In
That's
fact, the arguments on Medicaid were basically against funding Medicaid was that the government would be too big and have too big a role, not issues about the welfare of the people whatsoever.
But the flip side of that, government that governs best governs least, is that anything that has to do, anytime a local governmental authority, a city or a village or a town or a school district passes a law that they don't like, they clamp down and prevent them from doing it. They did the same thing. Counties cannot pass laws restricting corporate farms any more than the state. A city or an entity can't pass a gun control legislation that is more restrictive than the state. And there's a whole bunch of bills right now going through the legislature trying to restrict curriculum because they don't want any school district to teach tolerance. And so the 1619 project, anything from the Southern Poverty Law Center, they're telling school districts that you can't put this stuff in your curriculum when deciding on curriculum is strictly, according to state law, the prerogative of local school boards. So they're not governing least. They are micromanaging things that they want to micromanage.
So that's a matter of state law that the curriculums are determined locally?
Everything that I have read, and I've been reading a lot of it lately because of HB 1141 Amendment 23, and I forget the other bill that's trying to restrict curriculum this year, states that DESE cannot mandate curriculum. Curriculum is left to local school boards to determine. And all of a sudden, the legislature is coming in over DESE's head and over local school boards' heads and saying, you cannot teach this anywhere in the state of Missouri. So, and we're not the only state that's happening in this year. But Webster Grove School District just passed new curriculum last week that includes the teaching of the 1619 project in their social studies curriculum. And there was a discussion yesterday in Rockwoods about English language arts curriculum that Koenig and a couple of other state senators attended because they are trying to rile up parents against the attempts on the part of their school districts to teach a more inclusive or tolerant worldview, whether it's in social studies or language arts classes. And that's not governing least.
These guys are fanatics.
That's the bottom line. They are fanatic. Yeah.
Anyway, I've said enough. I've said too much.
All right. I wanted to mention that I sent out to Google Groups